Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. We are now doing part 2 of our interview with Jill and Katie Searle. Last episode, we began by talking to Jill Searle, who had very much a non-traditional Mormon upbringing in Ogden, knowing that she was gay, experienced a lot of sexual abuse as a child that went untreated. Going on a mission, marrying a man, being in a mixed orientation marriage, having that not work out, getting divorced, but finding the love of her life, her kindred spirit, and the 5 marriages that she had to have because of the lack of marriage equality. But how she and her ex-husband were able to find a way to still co-parent their children. And in the end of the story, it culminated with Jill's excommunication, which happened twice. 5 marriages, 2 excommunications. And it's a great story, so if you didn't get a chance to listen, please do. Now we're going to switch to Katie Searle. And she's lovely and delightful, and she's got a really fascinating story of her own that's also epic. So Katie, welcome back to Mormon Stories Podcast.
Thank you.
So not a normal Mormon upbringing.
I didn't know it wasn't normal, though. That's the beauty of it. It felt very familiar, and I was thinking, like, when my mom was talking, I don't even recall maybe like the sit-down talk about them explaining like what it meant to be gay. It just was kind of a normal thing that transitioned into my life. So I think that's interesting.
So as a kid, of those early years, what did you experience? And, go ahead and like reflect on anything you want in the early years, but then let's just pick up on your story.
Yeah, well, in the home, it felt very normal, and I didn't think anything of it.
Do you remember life before the divorce?
Vaguely, I do, but I was quite young. So it's mostly post, and so having 2 happy homes.
Do you remember the divorce being traumatic, or?
I remember like when my mom was up in Portland, and I just remember there being a difference in how often we were seeing both parents, and that being hard. And mom had that period of kind of anxiety in that tough period. And I remember her slipping down the stairs, right? There was some stuff I remember, but mostly I recall just having these 2 homes that worked really well together. My outside of the home, though, I didn't really talk about it. And I think that's kind of, looking back, I'm kind of bummed that I had some sort of fear, or, as mom said, like she thought at first if she came out to people that people would hate her, and that's not true, but that was the feeling. I kind of felt that way if people found that out about my family. And I was watching growing up, kids being hazed at school, or what people would say in church. And so there was this kind of cognitive dissonance that I was experiencing consistently from what I was being taught, and then what I was observing, which was just a very healthy, happy family.
Okay, so the divorce wasn't particularly traumatic, and having an extra pair of loving lesbian moms wasn't traumatic. It was the fear of people finding out.
Right.
And the worry about how they might treat you.
Right. Yeah, and I was kind of a shy kid. I kind of was always in the background, so it was okay for me to kind of just be discreet, and that's just kind of how I operated. But I didn't even tell my friends, though of course they knew because they were at my house every day for lunch or whatever. We just didn't really talk about it. I didn't really talk about it with my brothers either. We just kind of went on like everything was normal, because it kind
Mormon,
of was.
Just to not talk about something.
Right.
Yeah?
Until I was 18.
Oh my, really?
Yeah, yep. I remember telling my best friends that I had since I was 8 when I went off to college, and they're like, duh.
But you'd never talked to your friends about it.
I never talked about it, and like now it's so easy to talk about, but it was just something that was really hard for me to sit with.
Was there joint custody? Would you switch homes?
Yeah, we went back and forth. We were 2 weeks at each home.
Throughout all those years?
For most of it. Mm-hmm.
And so you'd have friends over at your lesbian mother's home.
Right. And I'm sure they talked about it.
And these were Mormon kids?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I had some Mormon friends, but it was mostly a secular friend group, yeah.
Okay,
So,
and they just never brought it up.
Never brought it up.
What's up with the moms?
right. I don't know. But it's, so that's something I
her
kind of
friends really
regret.
loved
but
us,
of
though.
course, they call them their moms, and yeah, so I think there was just something with, I would hear, on Sundays, there's the kind of quip of someone would ask a question, the instructor would ask a question, and someone would say like, the answer is always read your scriptures or go to church or whatever. But there was this like little rhyme, and it was like, read your scriptures, fast and pray, go to church, and don't be gay. Like little things like that seem so innocent to people to just like roll off the tongue were really hurtful for me to hear as a kid. And I, was exposed to that over and over again in Sunday school, in high school classes, and college. And I think it was something that never felt right. I kind of put it on that shelf, and I just went along with the church. When we were at my mom's on weekends, she would drive us to church. I did the normal baptized to 8, attended all the youth activities, EFY, and it just like kind of meshed in a strange way, but that ended up being kind of ultimately what I had trouble with as an adult. That kind of never sat well.
Well, was there ever a talk like, honey, I'm gay? Or would you have even known what gay was? Was that an explicit conversation where your mom said, sweetie, I'm gay and this is what it means to be gay? Or did you just pick it up on the streets and it was never discussed? Or do you even remember?
Like, I'm sure you did. And I think that it kind of, at an early age, was just like, you love who you love type thing. And then what I would be hearing at church or in society was kind of laced in there, and it was different, obviously, like what everyone else would hear. And I don't know, though. I think I always loved Susie and my mom. We had this really great connection. I think we're really good at compartmentalizing as Mormons, and that was just something I kind of tucked away and was like, I'll just focus on me and get to the celestial kingdom.
And for you,
have control over that.
Right. And so for you, having two sets of parents and one of those sets of parents being a lesbian couple, were there benefits to that? Were there cool things about that? Did you love it? Was it awkward? Did you hate it? Just in terms of what you experienced.
Yeah, I think like less to do with their sexuality, but just like generally they're quite progressive and open-minded, and I think that was a huge benefit to have. And my dad is also quite progressive as in the standard of Mormonism, but I think, and that's progressed, but that allowed me to kind of see two different perspectives really early on, and I wasn't raised in a bubble. I think I met a lot of different people and was exposed to a lot of different people that I otherwise probably wouldn't have been. And it just kind of always felt like a slumber party, just like a girl gaggle. And we've always been really close. And it's something that is a reoccurring theme in my life, is just this like powerful group of women that have just kind of always surrounded me. So I feel really grateful for that orbit and that feminine energy. Yeah.
And Orthodox Mormon.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And my dad is remarried, and, they're pretty gung-ho, cookie-cutter LDS, live in southeastern Idaho, so.
So I'll ask your forgiveness. I'm going to ask Jill one question. Jill, there's so many people now who leave the church and they're not gay, they're just normal heterosexual couples, and they're like, I'm not raising my kids Mormon. The church is racist, sexist, and homophobic, and they're not even a person of color. Maybe they're mildly feminist, and they're certainly not LGBT, right? You had every reason to just say, my children are not stepping a foot into that homophobic church that excommunicated me twice, but you didn't, that's not how you were. Can you explain how?
That was my trial throughout the whole time, because people outside the church looking at what was going on in the church couldn't believe that I would allow my children to be brainwashed, allow my children to endure this. They would say, how can you do this? Again, it's the, how can you do this to your kids? I was getting that from members of the church, like, how can you do this to your kids? And now I'm getting it from outside, like, how can you do
Just
this to
in
your
the
kids?
opposite way.
So it would crop up all the time for me. Like, am I doing this right? Like, they're going to church, they're learning these things, they're being indoctrinated with things that I don't believe in. They're being indoctrinated. I had become the prodigal parent now, just like my dad was. And my fear was they would see me in that same light. We have to save our mom. Our mom's not going to be with us in this eternal family unit. She's no longer a part of our eternal family. And
not as good.
And not as good. And maybe we need to save her. And the tables had turned, come full circle for me. And when that came up, I knew how important it was for Brent to raise the children in the church. And I knew there were good things that could happen because of that. But I just had to let go of it each and every time that fear came up. And I talked to my kids a lot. We had a lot of conversations, and I don't think they were afraid to bring those topics to me. Like today in church they said, and then that would give me an opportunity to say. And I always told them what I felt and believed. I tried to remain respectful of what their beliefs were, but at the same time demand that they were respectful of what I believed as well. And they gave me some time too to explain how I felt about things and why. So that's just how I handled it each time it came up.
And ultimately you were okay with them being raised in the church. Why?
That's a good question, because it wasn't a battle that would have been worth fighting, that would have benefited them in any way. My demanding that they not be raised Mormon would have caused a lot of issues for their dad. It would have caused a lot of issues for my family, for his family. And it was a battle that probably would have done more harm to the kids. It was really for me, it was all about what's best for the kids in this situation. And I remember, especially with my youngest, Jacob, he's a very smart kid and very quirky and funny, but when he was going to church, and after Katie was gone to college and Paul was grown, and I was still taking Jacob, or I guess maybe it was earlier, but anyway, I'd drop him off at church, and my motto to him was listen, learn, discern. Listen, learn, discern. I said that to him every time I dropped him off at church. Love you, listen, learn, discern. I always told
learn,
discern.
Discern.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I always taught my kids, you can turn the page. If there's something you don't like or that you don't feel is right, you don't have to believe it. Forget this all or nothing business. There are some good things that you can learn at church, but there's some things that you won't feel good about, and you don't have to believe those things. You don't have to take them into your heart. So that's kind of how I handled it.
I do these little coaching moments, and I just want to say that's one of the best little lessons I've ever heard for mixed faith couples, where the non-believer is very concerned about the believer who wants to still take the kids to church. Go back and listen to that. If you're in that situation, it's perfect advice for what I would recommend. Not that it always has to be the same outcome, but this idea of it's about the kids first and what's best for the kids. And if you have open communication with your kids, and if you teach them to have their own thoughts and their own opinions and their own beliefs, I think more often than not you're going to have positive outcomes. And thank you for that. Okay, back to you. Back to you, Katie. So what was your spiritual life as a teen in Mormonism? Were you believing it? Was it about it being true? Was it just a cultural thing?
I definitely had like a friend group, and there was that community feeling that was fun as a teenager in that social aspect. But I was definitely believing. I do remember praying about the Book of Mormon, however, and not feeling quite the same experience that I had thought that I was supposed to feel, but I didn't really think much of it. I was very afraid of like authority though. And it's funny because my parents are great, and they like let us kind of make our own choices and mistakes if we needed, they knew that's just how parenting worked. However, I think it was kind of the patriarchy or something, because still to this day I'm like too afraid to cross the street when it's not telling you to cross the street. There's something that's like in my head about that. So I was a pretty like straight and narrow teenager, and I was going along the path. I knew I was going to go to a BYU. However, I didn't feel like Provo was my scene. So I ended up going to BYU Hawaii, which I loved it, and I kind of feel like is a little bit the land of misfits of Mormons. And it, although like it still had the structure and the rules as a BYU, I think it allowed for a little more space and experience with people from different places around the world. And it's one of the most diverse student bodies, and I had a big awakening there about you can do Mormonism on your own terms. I would see some of the professors who were very forward-thinking and intellectual, and obviously members, and be like, okay, they can do it, and they can carve their own path, and I can do that. So there was a moment of like, I'm not taking everything they're giving me and accepting it all, but I feel like that's what I need to do. But now these examples in my life are showing that I can kind of pick and choose to an extent what I want to hold on to. So I think that the questioning for me kind of started in college. That's where I met my ex-husband, and I also went off to school not thinking I would be the Mormon girl who got married young and quickly, but that's exactly what happened. And I was 19 when we met, and we had
Nate Williams, right?
Yeah, and then we had a very quick courtship that was like a fairy tale. And
What'd you love about him?
he was very spontaneous and had a magnetism and charisma about him that just drew people to him. He was very, and he is still, he's very a unique person. He's not like anyone I've ever met. And I think we were also really quite compatible and had a lot of interest in common. He was also, as I said, I didn't talk a lot about my mom being gay for some reason. That was kind of still something that like I had to get to know people and trust them and kind of see where they sat in that regard. And I was able to open up to him about that really quickly on and knowing him, and that felt like a sign that, I trusted him.
And how did he respond to that?
He was really open, and I don't quite remember if he said anything specific, but it was encouraging, and obviously it felt warm and accepted. Yeah.
And romance. Did you guys feel? Did you have a sense that there was a strong attraction for each other? And
yeah, and I had dated someone right prior, and I think there's something about, everyone carries something from their past relationship into their next relationships, and it was clear to me that this was love, that I felt love for him, and it was a different feeling, and I'd call home and talk about it, and my mom would know what was coming, and it's quick, and it swept me off my feet for sure. Yeah.
So you got married at 19.
Did the thing.
And how do you go from there? And I'm just kind of struck that you're in college and you're not having this huge sort of like religious dilemma of, I love my mom, I love my stepmom, who's married to my mom.
Yeah.
And the church is saying all these things about LGBT. I mean, you would think you'd be just racked with, by the time you're in college, racked with this total torment and guilt, right, or confusion or conflicting feelings.
Yeah, and I think it was my sophomore year, I had a gender and identity class, and I remember writing an essay about gender, and I did my whole backstory, and I basically had to come out for my mom in this essay, and I remember turning it in and being like, what is going to happen? But of course the teacher just grades it. And that was almost like helpful to me. It's just normal. This is your life, I think it started to, I started to tease apart and kind of, once I started questioning one thing and I take a step back, it would start dismantling other things. And that was definitely once I was
Later.
married.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So it was post-college, just right after, though. It was the year we graduated.
So, I think a really big part of your story is probably the Kinfolk story. Is that the next phase, just sort of how that happened, or is there something else you want to share before we go there? Because it's not every Mormon couple that starts a global magazine, right?
I think it does kind of bounce back, but when we got married in the temple, because we had talked about this a little bit earlier, but my mom and Susie obviously weren't able to be in there. And I think growing up LDS, I felt that was the path. I knew that was going to happen. It didn't seem odd or out of the norm, but we did make special arrangements to have kind of a ring ceremony and involvement with all of our family. But the temple, we got married in Cardston, Alberta, and they made a really sweet gesture. I don't know if you want to tell that briefly, because I think that's really sweet when you were saying that.
We went to the Alberta temple knowing Susie and I, knowing we wouldn't be able to go into the ceremony, but I've attended many, many Mormon marriage ceremonies, so I didn't, other than it hurt, it was painful not to be able to go to my daughter's wedding. I also felt like this temple ceremony was something I'd seen over and over again, and that I could do without it, and that I knew Katie and Nate had made arrangements to include us in everything else. And we're sitting in the waiting room at the Alberta temple, and they had all these children running around, all the people who can't go in the temple or who are too young are running around. And they had assigned an elderly couple to kind of hang out with us and keep us company. And at the time, there was just the woman was sitting there, and she looked at me and she said, "Now you're Katie's mom, right?" And I said, "Yep, I'm Katie's mom." And she turned to Susie and was like, "And you?" And Susie says, "I'm Katie's mom." And she kind of sat back, and I explained that Susie was my partner, and that she had been in Katie's life since Katie was 6 years old. And she had kind of a look and I was sure I knew exactly what she was thinking. And I always loved to just zing people, I like to make them shy. I like the shock and awe. So I was just reveling in this, and she finally came to herself and she says, "You know what? We need to get you into that temple. We need to get you into that waiting room in the foyer so that you are the first people that Katie and Nate see when they come out." And it was just such a sweet gesture, and that's what she was thinking. It had a lot less to do with, oh, this is a gay thing, and more like, wow, you've been in Katie's life since she was 6. You guys are special, and we need to get you in there. And she made arrangements.
From where to where?
From this, little atrium where everybody was running around and screaming and chasing toddlers into the foyer of the temple that was just right outside the...
Recommend check.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
That's
right,
sweet.
Yeah, right where you can go. And so she got us in there and made sure we were comfortable and made sure we were the first people. And then, something I forgot, she had everybody else leave the temple,
So
go
you guys were
out.
the only ones.
And so it was
Make
just
it
us
special.
and Nate and Katie.
That is
And it
special.
was really special because I didn't know that they would be right there. And, you're getting ready in the bridal room and stuff. And I was cognizant that my mom wasn't there. So it was really great to walk out and see them.
Yeah.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. I think the pressure to start a family and have kids coming from many angles of, Nate's family or various places, that was put on us pretty quickly after
He
graduating.
comes from a big family, conservative Southern
LDS,
Alberta,
yeah.
right?
So Pioneer offshoot up to Southern Alberta, which is basically Utah up there. And so, we talked about kids, we knew we'd have kids, but it wasn't something we wanted to do right away. And in that way, we did feel a little bit like outliers. Because, a year into being married LDS, you can have one kid and be pregnant, or something, a year and a half. It's happened, so you have kids. So we'd be about the same stage as friends who were having kids and not have kids. We went through out of our kid was a company that we were able to start together with some of our best friends from BYU Hawaii that we had met there. So we kind kind of had this passion project that started as an online magazine. We had roped in people that were connected online that were really excited to be involved, photographers and writers. And
where'd you get the idea to do an online magazine? Like, why would that occur to you? And what year was this about?
we graduated in 2011, and we're kind of working on it and talking about it during that time, early 2011, and then mid 2011 is when it launched online.
Would a class have given you the idea?
Yeah, Nathan and I had a entrepreneurship class together, actually, and we had to create a business plan as our final project, and we called the company Kinfolk & Co., and we wanted to have an online shop for gathering items like plates and cutlery and banners, things that weren't super tacky, more refined, that we couldn't find all in one place, and like Oriental Trading Company, but like high end. So that was your go-to source. So that was kind of the premise that we launched from.
Did that come out of the way you guys were living your life? Were there things you enjoyed as a couple or with friends?
Yeah, so we lived in the married couple housing, which is called TVA at BYU Hawaii, Temple View Apartments. And it was so fun, and it was like living in the dorm in summer camp with all your friends. And we would just run as couples, like literally run. We were just having so much fun back and forth to each other's apartments at meals and cooking with each other and having basically like this giant extended family that we had been building. And I think that's kind of where we knew we had this passion, was to get together often around food, trying not to make it a huge fuss, but just knowing that like being together around this commonality was breaking down walls and inviting new people into that group. So it was something we did a lot, and it extended into that class. And then we developed the idea to do the magazine online to kind of see what sort of traction it would receive, because you can get a pretty good read on visits and hits. And it really resonated with people. I think we were talking about topics that everyone loves and has in common. And
like what?
Community and finding your place. And if you're not necessarily like in the same location as family, or have like a close-knit group, kind of strategies and ways to make your place and your way, that was a big thing. We talked a lot about slowing down and like appreciating the simple things, and embracing kind of like no screen time, and being intentional and deliberate within the various realms of your life, be it food, slow food, or thinking conscientiously about your consumption. It kind of like leached into all the different areas, and I think so. The premise was definitely like lifestyle, kind of how to kind of be more thoughtful and deliberate about how you communicate and interact with people and things in your life.
Okay, so the online magazine starts to take off.
Yeah, it got some traction, and we printed some copies for the people involved and a few extra, and we sold them. And they went quick enough that we reprinted and sold those. And we're like, there's something going on here. There's momentum. So we're going to start working on a second one and do it all in print. And we went the print route because we felt like that was very similar to kind of the ethos that we were disseminating. We're going to, walk the talk. This is something hard. This is something tangible that's in your hand, and it's experience, and you're flipping through it, and you're smelling the pages, and you're fully immersed in that sensory experience.
And they're reading articles that are written. They're looking
often
at
in that topic, and there were like online videos, and tried to make a pretty comprehensive user experience. We were able to sign on with a publisher who helped kind of grow the amount we were able to print and sell. And we learned the ropes from them, just kind of about how to look at paper stock and, just kind of the intricacies of that industry, since none of us were trained in publishing. And Nathan had a degree in business. My degree was in intercultural peace building, conflict resolution. So it wasn't necessarily transferable, other than that I really resonate towards kind of trying to break down the walls between groups. And that's something that always stuck with me about the LDS church, is that it felt very much us and them, and it kind of ostracized people, and it put people in boxes and really defined people into these categories, and it was clear who was good and who was bad. And that was something that was really hard for me. And when in college I was learning that's like it's not black and white like that. There's a lot of gray, and the social kind of ostracism. Oh, I can't say that word. Can you say that word?
Ostracizing.
Thank you. Just became a huge problem for me. So I think that translated over to Kinfolk, and how we could kind of weave that into the stories or the messaging.
Break down the walls.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and divisions.
Yeah.
Really quickly, did you end up having a certain set of responsibilities and Nate had others? Was there
Yeah.
kind of a division of labor?
Yeah.
Were you equal partners in this?
So the other couple did a lot of the business side. So they worked on like our financing and our finances and like projections and all the intricacies there on the business operations. And Nathan and I at the beginning were very focused on the production of the magazine and the art direction, and he definitely had the aesthetic eye and was the one guiding that. And I was kind of the manpower, like the gopher girl, and I was so involved with the shoots and gathering props. And the early issues are definitely my favorites because we were there often in the photos, or our friends were in the photos, and we were just doing it, kind of bootstrapping it, and it was really enjoyable. And then as we were able to like bring team members on and people who are actually trained in art direction or graphic design or photography, I kind of stepped more into the operations side. So a couple years in, I was entirely doing systems operations, personnel management, kind of like the HR side of things, which I enjoy being behind the scenes, so it was fine. And then I could use some of my degree in mediation and conflict resolution with, office dynamics, which always happen when you have a team.
So since there's a lot to cover in the story, let's just, if we were to summarize kind of while you were still with Nate, the peak success of the magazine, you can do distribution, you can do revenue, you can do like employees. Give us a sense for kind of how it grew or exploded or whatever.
Sure. Well, we were always a pretty tight, small team. I think that they may have more now. The office is now in Copenhagen, Denmark. When we were in Portland, we had about 12 employees, but something that I always really loved about Kinfolk was that we were able to syndicate the magazine in different countries. And so there was like a Korean, a Japanese, Russian, and a Chinese edition where they purchased the rights and republished it in their native language. And I really loved seeing those issues where it was the same photos and, just with the new characters and seeing that it was being disseminated globally was really neat. And the gatherings that we were able to do, we had a gathering series that we did all over the world and took on kind of more of like a guerrilla tactic where people from all over the world were hosting and putting these events on, sometimes at the same time, sometimes at different times. But it was really powerful to see kind of like the map where we'd like hotspot where things were happening or the photos coming in, that just people were on board and kind of wanted to be involved.
You were building community in the tribe.
Yeah,
kind of a
there
tribe,
was a
right?
tribe, and it was interesting because people would be like, how can I be part of this tribe? How can I be a member? And I'm just like, just invite a friend over. Like, there isn't something exclusive here. Like, we're trying to show you that this is attainable. Like, you can do this yourselves. And so that was, for me, something that I really loved and was able to kind of visit some of those places, meet those people, and was able to go to Tokyo and Sydney and Amsterdam and kind of feel that community in another place. Yeah.
Did you guys become kind of celebrities together? Were you a celebrity couple?
I think Nate was more of the face of the company. I was able to go and do those travels sometimes if he was overbooked or whatnot. And I think I was the consolation prize, but it was fine. I enjoyed interfacing with people and being involved, but he definitely is quite eloquent in speaking and was the one invited to speak,
Okay.
as you can tell.
And no, you're good. Do you have a sense for how many like copies you would do in one run? Like 5,000, 10,000?
Oh gosh.
Hundreds of thousands? Do you even know?
I don't know, but
It was
high.
Was it a major magazine?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you'd see it at Barnes and Noble.
Yeah, so we were able to be placed in anthropologies and Barnes and Nobles, and of course it's on Amazon as everything is. But I think that something really fun as well was it would pop up in these little boutiques around mostly the U.S. and other places. But I'd get texts from friends from growing up that I hadn't seen in years who would send me a picture of a Kinfolk that they would see in a shop window, and that was really sweet to kind of get those little pings coming in, and it was kind of surreal, really, to see it grow. But
Yeah, well, that's super cool. What an achievement.
well, thank you.
So talk about your relationship. What was that like? And let's talk about how things progressed for you two together.
Sure. So the work was definitely, our life was pretty consuming. It was really a challenge to kind of navigate that, having a relationship outside of work. And since it was our baby, and there were points and times where our office was our home and where home was our office. And so those boundaries were really blurry. And I think that leached in pretty early on in our marriage, of just trying to establish that. And I could tell Nate was very like involved and very, it was just something he was very passionate about. And he seemed to always, he couldn't be idle. And I think that's, just something that some people are just always busy and always doing things. So even in his pastime, he'd be reading a book about, I don't know, how to optimize something on your computer. I don't know. He was always learning, and I was much more like trying to set time apart. And I think that kind of was something that I just kind of wrote off as this is the period of our life where we're busy. If Nate was in medical school, he'd be busy and kind of preoccupied. I didn't really see it as an issue. It just felt like how things were.
Paying your dues.
Yes, and I think from the outside there, a lot of people observed that it was a strain, and it was a lot that we were doing and not necessarily focusing on our relationship. But I felt like this is what's normal for us, and we're good, we're gung-ho. There was after we left BYU Hawaii, we actually moved to Salt Lake for a period of time, and that's where we started the magazine. And when we were there, I was in the Young Women's Presidency, and we were in an inner city ward, and it was a place where I was like, I like these people, like we're all walking different walks and still coming together, and I enjoyed going because of the people, but it did feel like I had to get there, and Nate couldn't get there. And that was kind of the first time in our relationship where we were on a little bit different pages with church.
He went inactive, basically?
It was just a little harder for him to go.
Yeah.
I had to go. I had this calling. We weren't there for more than 6 months and moved back to Oregon. And we went to that ward a couple times, and I remember there was someone in the leadership who was talking about Nephi and, how he was commanded to kill Laban, and that if transferable to today, if we were commanded to kill someone, like that's what we'd have to do. Something kind of like pretty outrageous. And I remember I was just sitting there listening, and there was an older woman who kind of spoke up like if it was a Q&A, but it kind of wasn't, and was just like, but we're commanded to pray and ask that. We're supposed to do what we're told, right? Like even if it's the voice of God coming through a leader, we still need to ask for ourselves. And she got kind of this like murmur, a lot of pushback. And I remember feeling like that was kind of a moment where I observed, I think that there was the opportunity to ask questions, and that it was kind of being shunned. And so Nathan and I started to talk a lot about it, but I think he led the way. We were pretty in sync. When it came to the point where it was kind of too much for us, we decided to take a sabbatical from church and we weren't calling it leaving the church, but we were taking a sabbatical. And we talked kind of about what our family values are going to be, and kind of decided to like go at it proactively.
And was there history questions involved? Was there doctrinal stuff, or was it just like didn't feel like a fit, or just too busy, or not interested?
For Nathan, I think there was some history stuff. And then for myself, it was a lot of kind of what I've already spoken to. I remember saying, like, if I believe being gay is not a choice, and I sit in this position that is in opposition to the church, how does that negate that they're, like speaking for God, and like kind of getting back to the origin of that and asking those questions. And so we kind of took a beat from church and worked really hard in the company. We ended up moving up to Portland and doing a little church hopping up there to a non-denominational church, and then like a Presbyterian church. And I remember the pastor found out that we were Mormon and said because we had been baptized Mormon, we actually couldn't take their sacrament, which was like the first time I'd felt like I was on the outside, like not being able to take the sacrament, and applying that back to, Mormonism and all the people who feel that same way. And we ended up just kind of moving a lot, drifting away from that. Our company was growing and there was momentum, and we felt this timing of making a decision of where we wanted it to be and grow. And so in 2015, we took a few of our team members and we moved to Denmark, to Copenhagen, Denmark, and set up shop there. So that was our headquarters. The reason we chose Copenhagen, it's Nate's soul city, so he's really connected to it. But we did a lot of work there with like photographers and traveled there often, and it felt very in line with both like the ethos of the magazine as well as the aesthetic. And the magazine was going in a direction that was very Scandinavian and clean, and I think it called to him, and he convinced us, as he does, and we all went over. And when we moved over to Copenhagen, we were actually expecting our first child. And when we got there, we were really busy setting up and doing, we had to get our visas in line and get settled, and there was a lot to get into the medical system there. And by the time I kind of got around to getting myself into the system and getting an ultrasound, so I was 6 months pregnant, they found that the baby's heart was half formed and it hadn't formed completely, and that it was rotated. And it's one of the most kind of serious congenital heart defects. And how it wasn't detected before we went, I don't know. But, like if it can't even be called a silver lining, the fact that it happened there was alleviated quite a bit of at least the financial pressures of being kind of in their medical system and having to navigate it through it there. But Leo...
Because European healthcare is more generous.
Yeah, it was free to us being there as on the visa. I can't even imagine what all the tests and the scans that I went through there would have cost. We had my mom fly over, and because we didn't know anyone there, and it was the most difficult time in my life to anyway. So my mom was able to come and support me, and that was really great. But it was this transformational period in my life because I was going through something with Nathan and felt very in line with him, like we were our support system. But outside of that, we hadn't really been as much in sync. So Leo was born and he wasn't breathing, and we grieved and had that loss. And
he went to term.
Yeah, no, 6 months.
6 months,
yeah.
But stillborn, or?
We actually made the decision to terminate. So it was right on the line where we weren't going to be able to make that call. And we did a lot of research, and we called doctors and heart surgeons back in the U.S. And we asked what the process would have been back home, what it would have been like over there. And that was also a really traumatic experience to like come from a Mormon upbringing and kind of be having to even consider that I'd be put in this position. And it was the hardest choice to ever have to make.
How do you make that choice? Like,
you can't, I mean, it's really, really just difficult. I think I ultimately thought that my body was kind of his life support, and he was being sustained through my body. The moment he would have been born, if he went full term, he would have had to be rushed into open heart surgery and have 2 surgeries after that before he was 3. And the life expectancy, they just gave us all these statistics, and it was really grim. And I think we always wondered if we were making the right choice. But on his autopsy, they found quite a bit more going on inside. His other organs were rotated, and another blessing of being in Copenhagen is they did like a full genetic screening. We didn't have to pay for it, and they didn't find a genetic anomaly that was connected. So it was reassuring to know that like if we were to have other kids, that they would most likely be okay. But it was something that kind of rocked my world. It was my first experience with death and grief, and I don't feel like society equips us very well to go through it or to support other people through it. There's just not the resources or openness, or people aren't talking about it, I think, like we should. You have to search for it. You have to search for the support, but you're often not in the position to do that in that kind of state. I think there's a lot of things we can brush up on like how to talk to people about it and how to bring it up. And everyone's different, of course. Everyone grieves differently. But it was really affirming to me to hear people acknowledge him, ask about his like his name, say his name, and ask me about him and how he was doing. I think the harmful things or hard things to hear often actually came from family members who were involved with the church still. Things like it was, things are meant to happen the way they are, or he was too good to be here, or you'll hold him again, or he's in a better place. Those sort of things were hard to hear.
They needed him. Heavenly Father needed him.
And maybe it was their processing, but for me, I just thought it's not a better place for him. The best place would have been in my arms. And it just didn't sit well, and there was a lot of questioning and wondering. It was a very dark time, and I couldn't quite make sense of something like that. We weren't involved in the church, obviously. There wasn't that group and gathering around us, but I do remember having this distinct feeling that I don't know where Leo went, like where his spirit went, but I didn't feel, that didn't scare me. Like I felt kind of a peace just knowing that he wasn't in pain or suffering. And that kind of ultimately helped me on my spiritual path, because I was like, I got through after many, many months of kind of being a hermit, but like on my own with my community, with my people, with my family, not necessarily having the God answer or what happens to someone after they die. And that was a revelation to me, to be like, we're resilient humans, we're really strong, we can bounce back. The way that like Nathan grieved was much different than me, and there was some red flags earlier on that I hadn't picked up on, but it definitely came to light after Leo, and I thought it was directly connected to his grief, as Nathan had a dependency on alcohol that was really prevalent around that period of time, kind of self-medicating for what I thought was the pain of the baby, and probably some to that effect. And there was a preoccupation that I then shifted from my grief, which I was talking to therapists through and kind of working through, to kind of how to navigate this alcoholism with Nathan, and that was quickly what kind of consumed my life after that point. Probably about 3 months post losing Leo. And
that's a double whammy.
it was a double whammy. It felt like a lot. I didn't feel like I necessarily had him in the grief. I had him through the process of losing Leo, but it was very lonely in the grief. And just to say it, I can share my story and like my perspective, and Nate has his story, and I don't want to put words in his mouth or speak for him. But kind of.
And you're not dishing. You talked to him about talking about these
right.
things, and he.
Yeah, and he was okay with it. And I think like life throws us these curveballs, and I found that by talking about them, other people are able to connect and relate and hear and know that they're not going through things alone or the only ones going through things. So I err on the side of feeling good about opening up and being pretty transparent. So as we were working through that, I kind of wanted to give him space to kind of work through it and process it. We kind of tried different things, and it didn't seem like there was much changing and shifting. I wasn't really talking about it. I kind of talked to my parents a little bit, but without having grown up around alcohol, I knew very little about it. I didn't really know what was excessive or what was extreme. And the idea that there was something else kind of going on for him didn't occur to me, that anything there was like connected to me and like actually changing the course of our relationship or our time together. All of this while still running the company and getting that, keeping that going, and that being bosses and having a team and kind of managing their lives and livelihood, as well as kind of dealing with all of this. It eventually came to a breaking point where Nate was, just having a really hard time, and we were ships in the night, and I kept thinking things would get better. We're supposed to be on this path and journey together. But I had gotten to the point where I knew things had to shift and change, or I had to take a break. And we had ended up conceiving our second child during that kind of crazy time. And she's kind of like the phoenix from the rubble, it feels like a little bit, but definitely a miracle. And so I kind of gave a date of when I was thinking about, I need to head home and take a break and see if we can get this under control, and you can get this under control. And I learned a lot about alcoholism. I still have so much more to learn about alcoholism and addiction, but my role in things and the codependency and keeping things hidden or, enabling, I became very good at that, and I'm a caregiver, and that was something I think also from growing up LDS. But I had to really focus on learning to set boundaries, and being pregnant really helped me know where I could draw those lines pretty clearly. So kind of about the timing of when I was thinking about having to need to leave, I'd approached Nathan, and we had created this space where I think he wasn't very forthright and open at this time, but I had checked in with him and given him enough space that I think there was something there at least where he could be open at this exact time when I came to him, and he ended up coming out to me as gay.
Okay, whoa, right?
So this is 6 years. Yeah.
Triple whammy,
It's
right?
triple whammy. It's pretty, August we lost Leo. This was all going on, and then this happened in February, and I was 2 months pregnant.
And you were coping with the alcoholism stuff.
Right.
And you had been raised in a mixed orientation home, and did that blindside you? How was that for you?
It blindsided me, and I knew
repeating what your parents had, right? What was that like?
Sorry, what was that?
To be repeating sort of
Right,
in
the
reverse
kind
what
of
your
shadow
parents
life is interesting, but I think I knew kind of from the context of my upbringing how important it is if someone is coming out to you, how you're hearing them and allowing them to feel your love and acceptance, and kind of just creating that context for them. And aside from a therapist, I was the first person he came out to. So there was kind of an interesting thing where I felt the pressure of being the receiver of this really heavy information from him. And, since doing therapy, I've learned that, hiding an identity or compartmentalizing to that extreme that he was for that many years and never intending to come out, and him being raised LDS and feeling like this is what he was supposed to do, and kind of committing to us and our family kind of put him in this breaking point state. And I felt compassion, and I don't know if I said very much, but I listened and hugged him, and it was a lot to process. Obviously, I think we needed plenty of time. I stayed a month there in Copenhagen, and we talked about it, and we kind of broke it down, and I had so many questions, and we talked about like mixed orientation marriage. We weren't ready to call it quits. Like, we were quite compatible. Things had been really rough, but it felt really heavy to think about losing him in that moment so abruptly for me. And we had a lot of conversations, and ultimately decided it was best for the three of us if I went, or not necessarily if I went home, but if we separated, if we parted ways and I decided to go home. That was the landing place I needed, this kind of go home to my family and my support system back in the U.S. So that was 2 years ago.
And again, knowing that your childhood had been so defined by that situation with your parents, what was it like to find yourself in that situation yourself, having kind of a generational repeat of that scenario? Was that shocking? Was that heartbreaking? Was it great because you love your mom and you love how it all turned out? Like, there
was the familiarity to it, enough to the fact that when we got to the point of deciding to part ways, I knew it was possible to kind of coexist and be connected with each other, involved in our daughter's life in an amicable, harmonious way because of the role models my parents had been. And so that kind of erased the fear of that. I also came off of this really devastating, dark loss where there were no answers, and it just felt like completely ambiguous, to there's a little bit more to work with here. There is kind of a light at the tunnel. And although it was like such a shock, such a heartbreak, I had to fall out of love with somebody. There at least felt like there was a light or something to work towards in a different way. In fact, the light being the baby coming. And so we worked towards that together. I came home at 3 months pregnant, and I don't know, I wasn't as emotional as I thought I'd be as I was pregnant. I think she was like holding me together. There was something really like beautiful about just kind of like the energy, the maternal energy that I felt during that pregnancy. She went through a lot inside of me, but she's super resilient. Like, she came into this world like a powerhouse, and is just like as feisty a girl as all the other women in her life. And I think the experience of having her was so transformational as well. Nate was there, but my mom and Susie were there. My doula was there. The doctor was there. And it was just like this circle of women. And it just, anyway, it was really incredible to have that experience and hold her.
do you want to share her name or not?
Yeah, her name is V. It's spelled V-I. We landed on that as it's the Latin root for life, and coming off of a loss that felt poignant, but also just she was bringing me back to life, it felt like. So that's her name.
And not to reiterate, but we're talking about a loss of faith, death of a child, dealing with alcoholism, discovering that your spouse is gay, and then the end of a marriage. Mm-hmm. And
being
you leaving,
pregnant.
What's that?
And then being pregnant.
Moving, and leaving the business that you helped found. That's like that's like an octuple whammy. Like, and I don't mean to be funny about it. 2 or 3 of those things might be enough to sink someone. One of those things might be enough to sink someone. How do you survive? And then being a single mom.
Right.
Tell us how you pick up from there and keep breathing and keep moving.
Right.
Am I being overly dramatic, or did it feel that
it was
heavy?
It was a lot. There was a lot. I think I learned a lot of tools through my grief process. I think therapy is so important, and I hate that there's this taboo about it. I just think everyone should be in therapy. I love it. So that really helped me, just having that outlet and that safe space, especially when I was over in Denmark. I feel like almost to, like when your life falls apart, when your heart is breaking, when you're rebuilding things back together, it might not look the same, but I feel like the new configuration is often like stronger, more complex, and it leaves more space and room for growth and learning. And that resiliency, that's a muscle. And I don't know, I think going through things back to back, they were just hitting me, and it felt unreal at times, but there were people around me holding me up. I don't know. I think, Mom and Susie have been a great support system. There's something really special about being close to them and having their help. My brothers are home close by.
Although Dad's in Denmark, that must be hard.
Yeah, so he comes and visits, and it's a different dynamic that we'll always be working through and adjusting, especially as she grows and she's older and trying to navigate that. Things with him are really amicable, and at this point, we're in the same headspace about like V having like the fullest life she can in safety and security, and so I think we're aligned in kind of in that, and though I'm the primary parent, and that is a lot, and it's relentless. I'm able to take breaks. My mom helps a lot. I've been able to like balance things a little bit better with work. I thankfully can work at home, and I have her in daycare a few days a week, and so there's ways to like kind of allot time to different areas of my life and kind of focus on feeding myself and self-care. And I think I learned self-care, and that's a huge one during the loss of Leo, to keep doing those things that feed me.
So your favorite forms of self-care are?
Well, I love massages, pedicures. No, I think like even small things throughout the day, like I really want to like be there with V when she's awake and interact with her and being like as mom and involved in playing with her as I can. And so, if I need a break during that, it's just like, sometimes you have to sneak to the bathroom and take a breather, or have a chocolate bar, or like those little things that seem silly, but they kind of bring me joy or break up the day, or when she's sleeping, watching a funny show. It seems kind of silly, but it's like those kind of small things that just are set apart and feel like that's just for me. So, yeah.
Jill, what in the world was it like to see your daughter hit with so many difficult things?
It was hard. Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and take care of it all for her, but it's not what a parent does. We were there for her. We We went back to Copenhagen in December before a lot of this had happened. Was when Leo was due date was in December, and we had planned to travel there, and we went there to be there and support Katie, and had a good time then. And we just held her, we just held her in our thoughts. We held her in our arms when she got here. She couldn't get here soon enough. As far as I was concerned, I wanted her back home. I was very glad that she decided to come back home. I just want to do anything that I can to support her. But listen, she's wise. She's a wise old soul, this one. I've always taken advice from her. But just glad that I can be there for her. It was hard to see my baby go through those things. And the birth of, when I went back, when Leo was born, it was difficult. One of the most difficult things I think I had ever been through, to hold that little stillborn baby. It was, but I was glad that I was able to be there for Nate and Katie and Leo and go through that, even though that was difficult. But I was glad I got picked to go back and help. So.
And seeing her now, seeing her standing strong, being a working mom and raising V, how do you feel about that as a mom?
I'm not surprised. Katie's always been strong and independent. She's always been very thoughtful and wise, and she's always come through things strong. So it's not a big surprise to me. It makes me very proud, and proud of all my children and their accomplishments, and I have I think a special connection with Katie, the whole mother-daughter thing. We kind of think the same and move in the world in the same ways, and so it makes me very happy and proud of her.
Well, Katie, there's no way to do your story justice, and we committed to kind of a shorter time frame for this one because of constraints, but we're so grateful you share this story with us, and it's been really cool. How do you want to kind of end it? What would you want to share as some closing thoughts or perspective for those of us who are kind of like breathing deeply about all you've been through and how you've come through it with grace?
Oh man, grace. Give yourself grace. I think what I learned through my grief was when hard times hit, you do have to sink really low. Like, you have to go sometimes as dark as you can and just feel it. I don't think it's healthy to kind of buoy yourself up and talk yourself out of crying or those big dark feelings. You need to face them. I think one of the best pieces of advice I ever received was like, if something's shitty, call it shitty. Like, this is shitty. This is really hard. Sink into that. And not sugarcoat or, try to talk yourself up before you're ready to be. You have to go low. And I think just being patient with the process. Life doesn't go as we expect it to go, but you get through these things, you do. And then you learn things, and then you're on to the next thing and using those tools for the next thing. So life is cool in that way.
Do you feel like maybe you get a little bit of your resiliency from your mom?
Oh, maybe. No, of course, yeah.
What would you tell your mom as you've seen how she's navigated her life?
Well, my mom's like pretty unapologetically herself, and I think even hearing her tell her story again today, and then kind of like mirroring that with my experience later on with Nate. But I'm just like incredibly happy that like there was this point where she can fully be herself. And I don't know, the relationship that I have with my mom, I know it's special, but it comes with a lot of like work getting there, not necessarily with each other, but like the experiences that she has and has shared with me and allowed me to navigate my life, make my own choices, and fall when I need to fall, but be there when I ask for it. It's an incredible thing to have as a role model for mothering my daughter. So, thanks.
And for those who would say a gay or lesbian couple shouldn't be raising kids, every child deserves a mother and a father, what would you say to that?
Oh man, my life is so rich. I don't think that there's many people who have what I had, and I am so grateful for all the parents that raised me and the different people that were in my life. I think even for V, who has a gay father, like, even though he's not the one there with her all the time, she's not missing out. She has these arms of people from all over the world who love her, and I think it's a matter of perspective, but there's studies that show a lot of the children raised by homosexual couples have a lot of success and excel, and there's just no disadvantage, in my opinion.
And I didn't intentionally leave this to the end, but I realized I don't think we mentioned it, but I guess the November 2015 policy would have required you, if you were to remain a member, to denounce your parents' lifestyle.
Right. Yeah, when that came out, it hit me pretty hard because it was very clearly that I was that child growing up.
And V was
and
that
V
child.
will be that child. And so it came out in November. That was shortly before I even knew I was pregnant. And once I knew she was coming, I don't know if this is okay, I wanted to have our names removed from the church so she wouldn't be born into the covenant. I felt like it was her choice to make, how she navigated her life, and that I didn't want to put that burden on her of having to choose between an institution and her grandmother's or an institution and her father's. So we resigned after that policy.
All three of our children resigned from the church. And then I think Jacob resigned earlier, but our older son resigned around that same time as well. So they've all left the church.
So there'll be no renouncing of your mother's lifestyle, I'm guessing?
No.
Only if I screw up in some other way, I guess.
You guys are cute. Well, Jill and Katie, I just want to thank you guys so much for coming on Mormon Stories. Your story is a story of courage, of love, of resiliency, and of family, and it's a beautiful one, and it's so inspiring. So heartfelt thanks from all of us on Mormon Stories podcast for you being willing to share such a beautiful, epic, powerful, moving, and in the end of the day, kind of loving story.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for all you do to spread the word, whatever word that happens to be.
You're creating the space, for people to
Yeah.
hear and resonate with each other.
Love is love.
Love is love.
All right. Thanks to everyone for joining us today. Thanks to everyone who makes this podcast possible. And I guess a special thanks to Courtney and Danny Edwards here in Beaverton for helping us produce this episode, along with everyone else who makes it possible. You guys are great. Stay in touch, and we'll see you again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care, everybody.